Now the first thing we want to do is make sure that our feet are pointing down the wicket. The reason for this is it allows our weight to get on the balls of our feet. And here's our general setup position. Just as they're in their delivery stride, we want to go down, and then as that ball comes up, we then rise. So it turns into just down, up, getting ourselves nice and springy in order to push off. What we can find is that if we set and we're a little bit static with our set, we can find our weight falling back a bit, whereas just jumping into that position there allows our weight to be on the balls of our feet, and we can push off and go wherever we need to.
Watch this coaching masterclass I filmed with the wicketkeeping coach, Josh Sivier.
Hi guys, my name's Josh, I'm the wicketkeeping coach. We are in the Serious Cricket Indoor Centre to firstly look through some stood up and stood back technique.
Okay, the first thing we want to look at is where to set up when stood up to the stumps. Now, a lot of people believe that sticking our left foot on off stump to a right-hander is the way to go. The problem with that is that all keepers come in different shapes and sizes and different heights. Now, for me, I'm 6'3", and my stance is relatively wide. So if I was to put my left foot on off stump, I'm going to be way outside of off stump here. And what's the point in that? The whole idea is that we are around where the bowler's going to bowl, and they are aiming for the stumps. Specifically, they're aiming for this off stump. So what I like to tell keepers that I work with is that we need to think about where our head's going to go. And our head wants to stick just outside of that off stump. We're looking maybe 4th, 5th stump line, and that is an ideal space because where the bowler's going to try and hit, which is the top of off, we barely have to move. And keeping is all about being efficient with our movements. So like I said, we're going to be very close to where the bowler is aiming on a consistent basis. But what it also allows us to do is then have access to that leg side nice and quickly, rather than being further away from that leg side, which results in us really having to go. We also have plenty of access to that offside just by transferring that weight, and if we need to, just taking that little step. Cool, so let's look at setup. We're going to go step by step, and it's really important, especially when we're starting as a keeper, to follow the process. Okay, as we get older, we're then going to be able to find what works for us and what doesn't, but if we're beginning, following this process step by step is so key. Now the first thing we want to do is make sure that our feet are pointing down the wicket. The reason for this is it allows our weight to get on the balls of our feet. Okay, that then allows us to move. If our feet are open, our weight is then going to fall back, just like we would squat in the gym. We'd end up driving through our heels, but we don't want to do that because, I don't know if you've ever walked on your heels, it's really hard to move. So what we want to do, we want to be nice and agile and get that weight on the balls of our feet, and that starts from getting our feet down the wicket. Once we've got those feet pointing down the wicket, it's now to talk about width. Width varies from keeper to keeper, and that's absolutely fine. My rule of thumb is, can we just get it a little bit further than shoulder width apart? Some may be a little bit wider than that, others might be a little bit narrower. If I'm too wide, what you'll find is that my shins end up coming in and crossing over each other if there was a line that went all the way up. That is going to stop us from being able to transfer our weight, and we're only going to be able to go between our knees. Whereas, if we can get those shins pointing vertical, it's going to allow us to transfer our weight from foot to foot and get a nice range of motion. Right, so we've got the feet pointing down the wicket. We've got our stance just over a shoulder width apart. Now we need to get lower. The way we do this, the first thing we need to do is put our elbows onto our knees. What we're looking to do, whatever badge you have on your chest, we're looking to keep it facing the bowler, but we're just looking to drop, just like that. And here's our general setup position. Okay, what we've got is we've got a nice 90-degree angle bend, or relatively somewhere near that, on our knees, which then allow us to drive up as that ball bounces. Going too low, we're then going to be stuck here, and there's nowhere for us to go. It's such a mission to get right up there. So we want to be in a nice, powerful position, 90 degrees on the knees, to then drive up and collect that ball. So from here, Paul Nixon, the England keeper, used to always put his gloves on his chin so that he can then bring those hands out, and that's a really nice position for us to be in. Probably gloves just touching the floor just allows us then to rise with that ball, but it only needs to be fingertips. So if we follow that process of feet pointing down the wicket, width just a little bit more than shoulder, elbows onto knees, hands together, hands out, and bring in those elbows nice in front of these knees to allow a full range of motion. One thing we need to realize is that we don't need to be in that setup position forever. It's a tough position. We're working our quads, and we can't be in there for a million years. What we're after is that by the time that ball is about to be released, we're down. So it's a question of waiting for that bowler to come. Just as they're in their delivery stride, we want to go down, and then as that ball comes up, we then rise. So it turns into just down, up, down, up. We don't want to be there too long, because if we sit in this position for too long, by the time the bowlers come in, we're already halfway up because our legs are struggling, and therefore if it's fuller, we're going to struggle. Now there are two movements that we need as keepers stood up to the stumps. There's only two. We're trying to keep keeping as efficient as possible. Now, the first one we all know is that leg side shuffle, which we'll look at a little bit later. But the second one is a little step to the offside in order to get those really wide balls. They're the only two movements we need. The reason for this is we're looking to transfer our weight from foot to foot. Just like a tennis player, when they're waiting for a serve, you can see them on the balls of their feet going from side to side, and that's exactly what we want to do. We want to get our head and hands working together to get in line with that ball. And it comes from staying on the balls of our feet and transferring our weight from foot to foot. We want to imagine that there is a piece of string going through our hips, because what we want to do is we want to try and get that hip across as well. So if that ball's along this blue line here, we're going to get our hip across, head and hands, catch, and drive back to the stumps. The reason for this is it stops us from twisting, because we don't want to twist at all, or as little as possible, because if we're twisting here, my hands are then going to be in a difficult position, and the likelihood is that as I twist, my inside hand begins to close. I'm then catching with only one hand. Whereas what I want to be doing, getting my weight across, catching with two, and taking it back to the stumps. Okay, so once we're in that setup position, what we're going to do in order to rise with the ball is we're going to drive up through our knees with our quads. These are the players that we want to make sure that they're working. What I see quite often is people in a setup position where they don't activate their quads enough and end up rotating their hips. So their position ends up, their fingers are on the floor, but their chest is facing to the floor. Therefore, to look up is so difficult. And if you find yourself with neck pain and back pain, that could be the reason, because our hips have hinged too far, and therefore we're trying to fight our natural instinct to go down, and that is when issues can happen. By keeping our chest facing that way and facing towards the bowler, we allow ourselves to sit that little bit lower and then to drive up with our knees. If we're using our hips too much, because we've not engaged our quads, the only way we can move up is by opening that hip hinge again. And what happens to my hands? They come up and my fingers end up pointing towards the ball. And that is when fingers get broken. Cool, so we've looked at standing up to the stumps. We're now going to work our way back, and we're now going to look at standing back. Now, standing back, arguably very similar to standing up, but this time we don't want to go as low. Now, there's a really good way of testing where we should sink to, and it's by trying to jump as high as we can. Now, if you give that a go, we're going to go down and up. Now, the position we get ourselves into just before we lift off is the perfect position, stood back. So we think about it, feet shoulder width apart, and there, that is a perfect position for us to get into, because what it means is as soon as we get down, we're then able to push ourselves anywhere we need to go. Again, what we don't want to do is we don't want to sit in that position for too long, because then we end up getting stuck. Whereas we want to make sure just as the bowlers release the ball, we're down in order to then rise up. Depths of stances differ from person to person. You'll see Quinton de Kock, who comes in very nonchalantly and stands about here when he's keeping, because he's so athletic and he's able to push himself off from this position. Others, such as myself, just want to be a little bit lower in order to then activate those quads again in order to push off wherever I need to go. So, just in terms of where we want to stand when we're stood back, if the ball's nipping around both ways, or it's not seaming very much at all, or moving very much at all, just outside off stump is perfect, just like we were when we stood up to the stumps. If the ball's consistently swinging away, I would tend to then put that left foot on off stump in order to be able to feed that ball nice and easy. If there's an in-swinger, we might want to stand a little bit behind the stumps, maybe with our head on that off stump, because that shape's naturally going to take it to the leg side. And therefore, from here, we can go easily onto that leg side. It's all about working out what the bowler's doing, how accurate they are, in order to make it as efficient as possible for us to keep. We don't want to move any more than we need to. And by getting ourselves in a good setup position, wherever that needs to be, it's going to allow us to move nice and efficiently. Now, we talk about triggers a lot, especially when standing back. Some prefer numerous steps up. For me, it's one step with my left foot, and then I'm down. Jack of athletic fielding speaks a lot about jumping into that stance, especially as fielders, and essentially what keepers are now, we are fielders as well. Longer in the days is keeping being a secular thing. We are now part of the fielding team, and we want to be as agile and as mobile as a player at backward point than we do stood behind the stumps. Now, we want to be nice and springy as we get in. Like I say, I step with my left foot. That's just a personal preference of mine. If I'm going to the left-hander, what we'll often find is that I'll probably step forwards with my right foot in order to set, and it will vary from foot to foot. Whatever feels comfortable for you, we just don't need to overthink it. As long as we're in a good set base, as that ball is released, we're absolutely fine. Now, Jack of athletic fielding talks about jumping into that setup position, getting ourselves nice and springy in order to push off. And I really like the idea of that. What we can find is that if we set and we're a little bit static with our set, we can find our weight falling back a bit, whereas just jumping into that position there allows our weight to be on the balls of our feet, and we can push off and go wherever we need to. So standing back and moving, just like I said, we want to be nice and free, just like we were a fielder at backward point. You don't see a fielder at backward point shuffling everywhere they need to go. We want to be nice and free with that movement. If it's only a step or so either side, getting into here, and then shuffling to take that ball, absolutely fine. But if we need to turn and go, do it. Be free with our movement. We come in, set, and we turn and go. Allow our momentum to take us. If it takes us past all 4 slips or past backward point, do it. It's all about being free. We go down, there, turn and go. Just allow our body to go.